Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's Hearts of Home devotional. Robert here, and I am just blessed and honored to be giving today's devotional, and I pray that you may be blessed by the Lord's message. So today's message is titled, Bloom Where You Are Planted. And we're going to be looking at 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 20 through 24. And in the New King James Version, we are told, Let each one remain in the same calling in which he was called. Were you called while a slave? Do not be concerned about it, but if you can be made free, rather use it. For he who is called in the Lord while a slave is the Lord's freedman. Likewise, he who is called while free is Christ's slave. You were bought at a price. Do not become slaves of men. Brethren, let each one remain with God in the state in which he was called. So what's going on here? Well, in the middle of chapter 7, that deals primarily with issues relating to marriage and singleness, the Apostle Paul makes an important statement about calling and work. In verse 20, Paul is saying, this does not mean Christians should refuse to allow any changes to their life or circumstances. Instead, he is warning them not to worry about changing their status or to change it for the wrong reasons. Paul specifically says, as the Lord has called each one, so let him walk. And in the next couple of verses, he is confirming that no matter where you were prior to being called, slaves or not, they were commanded to stay as they were. It shows that obedience that comes as a result of faith is far more important to God. So rather than concerning themselves with their current situation, it says in verse 20, let each one remain in the same calling in which he was called. We are told by Paul specifically in verse 22, for he who is called in the Lord while a slave is the Lord's freedman. Likewise, he who is called while free is Christ's slave. And what does that mean? We were purchased by God at a price, the blood of Christ. He finishes by saying, Brethren, let each one remain with God in that state in which he was called. So how can we relate this to our own lives? Well, I think it's pretty clear that although Paul is using circumstances such as slavery as an example of where people may have found themselves in that time, we can learn from it. It is where we find ourselves today when we come to know Christ as Redeemer. We have come to know Christ right where we are, and we don't need to make life-altering changes like where we live, our jobs, marriages, etc. Rather, through knowing His Word and accepting Christ as Savior, His Spirit can do the work right where we are. Many of us found ourselves in a life of alcoholism or drug abuse. Many of us can look back at all the things we did in the past that separated us from God and the calling He has for us. And we came to know that through Christ, God is the master artist and can take the most broken of broken and make them whole. And He did that right where we were. You see, most of us find joy in that. We feel free from bondage. Our chains have been broken. We know it and we love it. But what about the person that is out there right now, maybe at this very moment, who feels like their circumstances or their choices makes them unworthy to come into the presence of the Lord? Those who feel like they are too far gone. What about them? What if that person is your neighbor, your coworker, your friend, your family member, or even your enemy? Well, folks, just like it took someone like Paul, who was broken and known as Saul of Tarsus, a Pharisee of Pharisees, and intensely persecuted Christians prior to his calling and coming to faith, it will take someone like us who live in the light to bring that knowledge to those in the dark. There are so many unbelievers and even believers who do not abide in His Word that are truly lost in this world. and they are at risk of losing their salvation if we don't go out there and share the Great Commission with them. Then if we don't do that, what good are we to God and His kingdom? Let's blossom where we're planted, guys, and bring the word to those who don't know the word so they can blossom where they are. It is for God and only for God. It is not what you or I can do, rather what He can do through us when we allow ourselves to be watered by His word and by His promises. A single weed can destroy a garden over time. Weeds will turn into weeds, and the whole garden can be gone in a matter of time. So let's you and I do the work we are called to and start gardening for God's kingdom, no matter where we find ourselves. So as always, I appreciate each and every one of you and truly hope that you were blessed by His message. And don't forget to check the link in our description for today's song. Thank you and God bless.